Shall we begin? Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. Let's kick off with a support talk.
$. $.
How many of you do you recognize the sound that you just heard? I bet it doesn't bring too many great memories. For every person in this room who has ever been on call, this sound might trigger a PTSD response or an inquisitive call to adventure. To me, this sound reminds me of a difficult time during the pandemic, when I'll be woken up at 2 in the morning, feeling sorry for myself and my partner, who had to be reminded yet again that there are very few moments one can enjoy life, even at night. Depending on your reaction, you might find this next hour hard for you to digest or not, as I'm handing in the invitation to reminisce on those times that you were on call for your organization. And hang on to those feelings and questions that those late hours were bringing into your head. Did anyone else respond to this call? Do you really need to wake up? Would anyone notice if I just turned off my phone? In those fine moments, was your head filled with despair, trying to figure out what was going on? Or was it just another chance to prove you're the right person for the job, as you just happened to approve a merge request in that area last week? During those hours, I would start my nocturnal crafts, trying to bargain with this invisible power to convince it really that there is no need for me to wake up. I thought we fixed this issue last week. I should have paid more attention to the handover on Monday. Are there any docs on how to fix this issue? Are there any tests in this area? Why do we have an S3 bucket called snoring raccoons? Regardless of how many times I would fight this in negotiation in my head, the inner responsibility would win, and I would get my head into the game. Don't get me wrong, I always like to get my full 8 hours of sleep, but it was particularly painful to log into our monitoring platform, to realize that there are no magic monitors to tell me how to get to the bottom of my problem. The thought alone that there are so many business cases that we couldn't have accounted for put me on edge. These were all symptoms of how ready my team and I were at the time to deal with severe anomalies in our system. I was about 6 weeks in, and while my knowledge of the domain improved over time, the rate at which we were growing from a product perspective made it difficult for the average engineer to keep all that information in their head. The system felt unpredictable. I barely had enough domain knowledge over particular areas of code, and the error messages felt so vague that I could barely decrypt what part of the system I should look into first. To be on support as an engineer means a lot of things, but at the bottom line is to be that friendly neighbor that you can distract with a technical question, that you can ask to chase a design in the wild, or just ask for advice or best practices. It means that you are designed to get distracted, triage, and reassess on the spot what's the best thing to look into right now. Even before I joined my company's support rota, I knew what was coming was not going to be easy. As I was transitioning from the good old days of support where inquiries would come sparsely once a day to streams of 4 to 5 queries a day, each negotiating a higher level of urgency. In our worst days, we would see 3 to 4 critical changes spawning into our Slack channel each week, each alluding to a scenario that we haven't considered soon enough in the preliminary phases of our design. The curse of success, as I would like to call it, meant that we had to put our differences on the back burner. And for several years, deciding to focus on our product development came with a clear conscience that our supportability is good enough. And while we were still successful in solving a lot of our requests, it wasn't always easy. As I was reminiscing on my times in FundApps, I couldn't but remember all those long hours of hard debugging, all those reverted merge requests, all those direct connections in the client environments just to assess the behavior of a service in the wild. We knew that things could have gone better, but for the sake of expanding our range of products, we had to accept the practices as we had them at the time and focus more towards product development. So what I'm about to share with you are the chapters in our company's history where we had to exercise our adapting skills. The identity of our company plays a big role in these decisions, though. As a business-to-business company that started as a bootstrap, our revenue represents our lifeline. So we build and drive changes with the context that we had at the time. So some of the decisions that you might hear today may not be exactly your cup of tea, but rest assured they were made deliberately with the resources and the context that we had at the time. In the second part of the presentation, we're going to focus on the engineering practices that never left us, regardless of the changes that our team topology witnessed. But before we jump into that story, I think this is the best moment as ever to share with you what support represented for us over the years. Our responsibilities have taken many shapes, some of which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. But what it may not be as visible is that the nature of our work makes our contractual agreements quite aggressive. The type of industry that we work in, regulatory compliance, means that our clients need to work against the clock to meet certain deadlines. Our service is meant to be reliable enough to significantly reduce the time needed to report this data. But if it is not reliant enough, the client could miss the deadline, fail to comply, and potentially be fined billions of pounds. And while our moral high ground as an individual could be varied, and we don't take legal responsibility for these fines, we do need to maintain our product's reputation. So let me tell you how this has been translated in our everyday job. We would offer context from a domain and technical perspective to the client requests raised by our client services. We would provide debugging techniques to our regulatory team, who in exchange be responsible to translate regulatory rules for our clients' investments. We would use basic visibility techniques such as logs or metrics, which only got better through time through the shape of observability, monitoring, alarming, and tracing. We would ensure that our revenue team can make fail-proof demos for our prospects regardless of time and place. Lastly, we will be at the front line of our incident management zone. Your definition of an incident might be different to mine, so just for everyone's benefit, when I say incident, I mean a critical change in one or more environments in production for our clients. And while we may not be completely responsible to fix a breaking change, we are there to ensure that the relevant teams are aware there is an issue, and if necessary, we are there to enable the pipelines to have that fixed into production. Regardless of the problem, the bottom line was that support represented the bridge between our client services and engineering, the interface between our product decisions and the impact that they have on our services and on our clients. So for our new developers, the intention was for them to learn the new system, figure out how to communicate with our client services, and find creative ways in which they can improve our developer experience. Fast forward to 2024, we will still keep our balance between our product development and feature maintenance, which basically will translate in communicating with our client services and keeping the health of our deployment pipelines. However, with more than 50 engineers, 5 product teams, and 1 internal team to take care of, it is more important than ever that after 5 years or even 9 years of essentially doing the same thing, that our support goals are clear in everyone's head. I will cover this in the second part of the talk as well, but I think it is important to share what I think are the most important takeaways of this presentation. Our first goal was to ensure that our teams can get closer to product nirvana. Whether you have a technical or product question, you go to support first, and if we cannot help you, we will get you to the team that could get you closer to an answer. Our second goal was to leave things better than they were before. Something as small as improving a technical documentation with a suggestion that you may have not considered obvious could save someone an hour of the time in the future. every effort counts, and it builds towards the internal quality of our collaboration. Our third goal, or better said, rule, is to never assume that we will be a support team forever. Whoever picks up our responsibilities in the future should know where to find our solutions to get themselves closer to an answer. You may be listening to these points and wonder what's so special about them. Shouldn't they be a given when you're setting the grounds of a new team or project? And what an excellent point you'll be making. I hope that I get to talk to you after this hour, because I do think you are onto something. I want you for now to keep that question into your back pocket, and let me ask you a question. How do you define support? What are or should be the main responsibilities of your team? What feelings surface at the idea of being on support for more than a week? Actually, let's have a quick experiment, and with the show of hands, tell us if you're part of the support collective in your organization. You may not be called this way, you might call yourself site reliability engineers, operations. Regardless, pick someone in the room you haven't worked with before, and for the sake of the experiment, assume they have the necessary tech stack to work with you, and leave your hand up if you think they'll be able to make good progress on your work ticket by tomorrow. If you decided to leave your hand up or not, this may be a sign of how ready you are to onboard someone new onto your service. If you are not part of the support group in your organization, who are these people you would go to when you want to report a bug in production, unless you're the person who's fixing that issue? Perhaps the feelings more associated with that part of the organization is stress, burnout, fear of not screwing up. Perhaps you don't want to think about this right now because what really matters to you is leadership, growth, innovation, or meeting some very ambitious goals for your company. There are no right answers. There is no perfect recipe. What worked for us may not work for you. I'm sharing our definition of support because I'm very proud of the point that we got in this company together, as we managed to finally reflect how we can reliably scale to thousands of customers without drowning in hundreds of requests a week. This is a sign of a healthy revenue pipeline. All those hours of doing prospect demos, on client community, on feature development have been paying off, and we are finally in a position where we can find how we can keep our client base as satisfied as they were when we could have counted them on our fingers. For us, that meant to look into our support quality. But as there is no perfect answer for you, there hasn't been one for us. Over the years, we have experimented in a lot of ways. Back in 2019, when I joined, we were all working from a cozy office building floor in Shoreditch, London. And we were about 20 developers at the time, out of which 50% were hired in the last year. And the spirits were running high. Laughter and nerve bullets were a daily occurrence who were making our business ambitions flow smoothly through our weekly business meeting plans, even for those who were just starting their journey at FundApps. Since we weren't that many to begin with, and working from home wasn't something that we would casually do, the context of the work was contained within the same space. So the teams at the time were divided by card suits. We were diamonds, clubs, hearts, spades. Each would interchangeably work on different parts of the system, regardless of our skill sets. Front-end, back-end, feature development, performance, you name it, we'd do it. Having approximately 2 pipelines and 1 monolith to take care of, it was easy to pick someone from the crowd who would be pretty good at understanding what we're doing as a company. That's why doing support didn't take a lot of convincing. Once an individual felt confident enough in their triaging skills, they would get assigned to what I like to call a more traditional support rota. The individual would stay on support for exactly 1 week, and it would work for them. The context of the work is very important. It can determine how easy it would be to support the product or not. And I found it very interesting that back in 2016, the engineering team would be so small and the context would be so small that they would assign themselves to be on support for exactly 1 day, and it would work for them. Spoiler alert, while we are an entire support team right now, this is not the first time that we decided to build a support team around our biggest product. Back in 2021, we thought a handful of smart individuals would benefit from being on support for 6 weeks. 6 weeks surely is enough to get to the bottom of our most complicated problems. Surely, a team can divide that backlog between each other and reduce it threefold in that amount of time. Easy peasy. I was there when we made that decision. In fact, I was part of the assembly that decided to give it a go, but for some reason, I wasn't part of the performing team. I did decide, however, that I will facilitate the retro at the end of those 6 weeks to see how the team did and felt about it. And I still have my notes from that meeting. I had to look them up for this talk. And while it wasn't a complete fiasco, the team didn't really jump into the challenge with both feet. They stayed reactive, trying to pair on the more difficult questions, and general self-organization was better. However, one eye was still kept on their original team's roadmap, anticipating that they will go back in no time. More interestingly, their focus was more on leadership opportunities, managing someone, or leading a project. Back then, the team's focus was different and the company's focus was different. So after only 6 weeks, we decided to call off the experiment. For the people in the room who are paying attention to the numbers, and given that the audience target is engineers, I do hope there will be a few of you, you may be wondering why did we choose 6 weeks to begin with. Does anyone know? Except my colleagues who have worked with me before. Has anyone attended Glenn's talk 2 hours ago? Cool. Does anyone work at Basecamp? For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, Basecamp is an organization famously known for their ways of working books. More relevantly, at FundApps, it is known for two of these books, Rework, legendary. In fact, our founders, Andrew, decided to found our company after reading this book. And more relevantly, Shape Up, which is a product methodologies book, where you basically understand how you can shape your work in accordance to your client's needs. So for those features that you start from scratch, and you have no idea whether they would be having a good feedback from your client base or not, we would assign them 6 initial weeks of development and see how the client responded to it. If the response was satisfactory, cool, we would assign them 6 more weeks of development. If they didn't like it, well, at least we didn't spend half a year to find that out. So since everyone was working in these 6-week sprints at the time, we thought that maybe support would benefit from the same synchronous cycle. In our case, our most valuable clientele were our developers, and the proof of concept didn't go that well. We draw the same conclusion that at least we didn't spend half a year to find that out. But yeah, Basecamp is great to bring features in front of our clients, not so great in making our developers on support happy. One thing we did get out of that experiment, though, we learned that people really enjoyed having a support buddy. To know that if you had a hell of a week, at least you have someone to share the responsibilities with. A person would stay on primary, frontline, making sure to keep that response time nice and low. And the person on the secondary would stay to make sure that they have the context of the work from the previous week, they have space to finish whatever has been carried over, and more importantly, they would be available in case the person on primary would need more people on deck. So we kept that. And even to these days, our biggest product team is still using this buddying strategy. The rotational element of our methodologies represented a lot of things. It was, first of all, a point of inflection. People can focus on different things for a while. a change of scenery. Good or bad, it made you reflect on whether you like the work you're doing, the type of team you're in, or the type of workload you get. If you enjoy the pace of change, reshuffling prioritizations, or understanding that decisions are not as black and white, you can speak to your manager to make some changes to your work style. If not, no drama. For at least a couple of weeks, you can focus back on deep dive thinking, architecture decisions, product designs, and you can forget all about support for at least a couple of weeks. The rotation represented also a tool for fairness. Whether you enjoy being on support or not, it gave everyone a chance to get exposed to different parts of the system they have never worked with before. It gave everyone the chance to exercise their autonomy and ownership skills, and that was particularly important if, at times, your organization was suffering from the so infamously called hero culture. Let me give you some context. Do people know what I mean by RCAs? Root cause analysis? Those type of meetings that you have in the aftermath of an incident to surface the highest level of a problem. From where I was standing, these RCAs would bring this unspoken point to the table. The quality of our incident management was directly proportionate to whether the individual who had the context of the faulty service was in the room or not. So if that person happened to be online, having the context and the intricacies of this faulty service, they could steer us away from the lighthouse. But if the captain didn't happen to wake up or wasn't online, it would take us significantly longer to reach a resolution. It was one of those times where we weren't aware that we were promoting a hero culture or differently known knowledge silos. So reserving individuals a spotlight to get exposure to parts of the system first, to get so intimately familiar with faulty parts of it that they cannot stop until they get them in the better place, that type of attitude is what made us avoid relying on the same 2-3 individuals, or God forbid, one individual to actually resolve our issues. We work with this philosophy, good enough is better than perfect. And to understand this imperfect system with its quirks, with its tech debt, is what made us, is a privilege actually for the people who may not so naturally seek the spotlight in our organization. So over time, the knowledge of the conglomerate would slowly drip into every individual's head. And the rotational element of it is what made that knowledge dissipate evenly across the department. So shifting our responsibilities from one person to another help us fill in the cracks of our foundation. Still with me? Let me give you a quick summary. What we have been focusing on the first 5 years of our journey. We would start small with rotas as small as one person on support a day to a whole team for the entire 6 weeks. And while not everything was picked up, while not everything stuck with us, we picked up a few ways of working that were promising for us, such as traditional rotas, budding strategies, or simply being more aware of our tendencies to rely on the same 2-3 individuals to fix our problems. As we became more successful in selling our main product, we also got appetite for more services, more features, more risk. Fast forward to 2022, our product roadmap was soaking in creative juices coming from both our product experts and most loyal clients. So in a matter of months, we shifted our focus from mastering our main product into specializing into different branches, greenfield projects, and intense event storming sessions. As someone who is a big fan of Alfred Adler's philosophy, I was embracing these changes with the enthusiasm of a dog spotting their owner trying to get ready for a walk. Finally, I can be the master of a new domain. I can learn the best serverless patterns, the best testing frameworks, the best pipeline processes. It's going to be great. All we need is time. Now, everyone had the same golden retriever energy as I was exuding, and a good part of our developers decided to stay on the mothership. feeling more responsible to improve the performance of our main core component, the engine. Hats off to them. They are the reason why we managed to reliably scale to our biggest prospects we had that time. And if you want to learn more about it, you are in luck because my dear colleague Leah will have a same presentation in this room tomorrow. And if you want to learn more about it, she's your person. But as we were growing and diversifying, understandably, not everyone can fit the context of our entire code base in their head. And it was unfair to assume that someone who was setting the foundations of a new service could also take care of an old one in the process. So we split our responsibilities into so-called product teams, which would contain ownership of a particular category of work, and that we would entrust the others to become shokunin, masters of their own domain. The next sensible step was to remove these individuals from the main support rota, anticipating that sooner or later they will have to maintain their product in production. So out of 40 engineers, 20 were set on their path to build new business value for our customers, and the rest stayed to improve the foundation. So with half of our developers already specializing into different financial sectors, we also considered that the main support in the main rota would benefit from dividing our responsibilities based on our skill sets. So if you were one of the 5 front-end engineers at the time, you would be assigned on support every 5 weeks, which was quite a change from being on support every quarter or so, but it was not unprecedented. Bear in mind that at the same time, our customer base was still growing. And as it comes with the nature of a business-to-business software, every single client implementation will have a significant impact on our support demand. At the same time, as the core team was looking inward to stabilize our core product, and our front-end developers were looking to migrate our UI to new, different web framework, a significant proportion of our clients were growing tired over the slow progress of our feature development, even though we were still doing them. But much harder to admit, during that time, they would experience bugs in the most critical parts of our system. During that time, our CDO had to join more client calls to alleviate their worries than he would ever care for. So let's take a step back. The engineering team not only split in half, but we also split our responsibilities into subcategories, and now people are expected to be on support every 4 to 5 weeks, while also stabilizing our main element of the product, the engine, and migrating to a new front end, and building new feature developments, and dealing with concerned clients. It doesn't take an expert to notice that these decisions at once were risky, but we thought it is the best bet we have at the time, and we can reassess in a couple of months. My colleagues reluctantly accepted the challenge, but they knew what was coming was not going to be easy. As the ambitions of the business grow even higher to report these monthly wins back to the organization, having people pulled out a quarter of that time to deal with stress-inducing client queries was, to put it lightly, demanding. The signs of such a frequent context switch were growing more and more visible. Tickets were being picked up but left untracked for weeks on end. Handovers would be frequently insufficient, and engineers would decide to stay back on support for a couple of extra days instead of rejoining one's team. And even with that commendable attitude in mind, documentation was desired but often overlooked in favor of actually rejoining one's team. A lot of non-functional items were left out because teams could not afford having an individual being pulled out more than 5 days in a row from their roadmap. So at the same time, people were still expected to go on breaks, have holidays, take part in the hiring process, use their learning days, and even manage a few people. all of these things that make our company so great could not be stopped just because the workload demanded it. So everyone dropped the weight of what they could just in order to keep the balloon lifted. A piece of documentation here, a ticket untracked there, an ambitious automation left on a ghosted branch over there. I wish I could tell you that the impact of these choices was as isolated as it seems, but that would be a lie. During that time, our incident rate grew significantly, and it became clear that we were not debugging our own thinking. We will not take the extra time to assess how we can put safeguards in place for the changes that we are making in production. What began like an innocent oversight snowballed into a series of tiring incident reports, which pushed our roadmap even further into the future. It became obvious that we had to change we had to change our attitude towards delivery. And instead of expanding our knowledge more broadly, we had to take things more slowly, dig deeper into our assumptions, and look beyond the existing suite of tests. So, fast forward to the end of 2023, our engineering managers took a leap of faith and asked across the organization who would be willing to be part of a team who would support our main core product. That team would be responsible not only to make sure that every single client request was answered in due time, but also their focus should shift from their reactive nature to proactively understanding how they can reduce manual interventions and repetitive chores. And so, the Powerpuff Girls team took birth. And we've been working in this formation for the past 8 months, and while it hasn't always been easy, it's been proving to be the best solution to our problems. However, the quality of our support, the quality of your company's support, isn't the result of a secret incantation of the right people at the right time for the right amount of time. It doesn't require you to be an expert in your own domain, and it doesn't require you to have your backlog empty. Your experience supporting a mature product is the result of the practices that you use to investigate and debug these issues. So with so much time to reflect on our lessons learned from the past and our team goals, we have finally reconsolidated the fundamental practices that make our engineering conglomerate efficient. So, for the remainder of this talk, we're gonna brush over them in the hope that they will inspire your agenda for this festival, in which brilliant individuals are spending considerate amount of hours to expand on these topics. I'm not going to call out on anyone, but for the sake of keeping this tidy and friendly, we're gonna divide these practices by layers. We're gonna call them reactive, adaptive, and proactive. But please bear in mind that these are mere guidelines. You don't have to tick every single underlying practice box to consider yourself at one of these levels. But more importantly, you don't have to reach proactive levels with every single component of your product. The purpose of this classification is to make you more aware of potential blind spots in the way that you are conducting work in your team. So, without further ado, let's dive into a meta practice, team objectives. Back in our first month when we started as a team, we would handle every single client request as it came. No matter how big and small, we would assess on the spot and learn on the spot what is the most sensible way to reach a resolution. We were operating in that way for about a month, and let me tell you, it felt chaotic. Not only because we couldn't really tell the rest of the organization how we were doing, but we could almost see the burnout entering the room, not even bothering to put their coat on the hanger. More frustratingly, because we couldn't make the decisions of what we should focus on, the rest of the organization felt at home to make these decisions for us. And for several weeks, we were in negotiation with our senior management on what we should focus next. I would advise anyone to stay at this level for as little as possible, just to avoid difficult conversations. Setting up team objectives may seem blunt, soulless, corporate, especially if you align them with quantifiable metrics such as resolution time, lead time, or number of tickets resolved. However, back in our first month, when we would be so drowned in support requests that we could barely take a step back to assess where we are, the team objectives gave us a comforting layer of reassurance that the tickets that we are solving, as disparate as they may look like, are pieces of a puzzle that are completing a big picture. More than that, because we finally understood what we should focus on, others could not debase our intentions with their own interpretations. Having faced many different issues at this point, we have an educated understanding of the patterns that we find ourselves now and again, and can separate them into distinct clusters. We can spend deliberate sessions brainstorming and debating how we can improve our team objectives in alignment with how our business would best thrive. It is these objectives that surface the practices that we're going to talk about today. And if any of them are bringing a twinkle into your eye, use today as an opportunity to share how you're conducting them at your workplace. So with that in mind, let's go into the actual practices. First practice, a mindset of moderation, or do more with less. We are not here to work the hardest. We are not here to prove that we are constantly online or irreplaceable. We are here to set the standards of a great quality service where eventually every single anomaly is traceable to a particular cause with as little human intervention as possible. We are here for a good time, not a long time. So as you begin your journey of only keeping things that spark you joy, you want to take your environment as it is and consider how does your team and stakeholders understand the service and how does it compare to your own assumptions? What are the most critical parts of your system? Do they know how to fail visibly and loudly? Are they covered by the right type of tests? Maybe take a few more steps back. Are you familiar enough with the product you're trying to defend? What are the most common user paths of your web application? If a bug is reported by several users, do you have the right expertise to assess whether you should take a turn in the road, or can it be assessed at a later time? Focus less on having an opinion at this time and listen to what the citizens of your city have to say. Engage your active listening. Ways in which you might consider doing that is by seeking training sessions from subject matter experts on the most critical parts of your service. Write documentation for the unfamiliar parts of your code, even if it turns out that someone has done the same thing as you 6 months ago or even better. Speaking from experience. Explore unknown parts with your team or with your teams in a blame-free session, blame-free session, just to understand better different parts of the system. Lastly, organize regular cross-team check-ins with the teams that are sharing the same code base as you. Chances are they have some pretty good ideas on how to improve the maintainability of your product, but they never had the same space and resources as you to improve it. Prove to them you are there to make their wishes come true. If you engage in this type of sessions, knowledge sharing sessions regularly, chances are you have gained a lot of insight and pain that your team had experienced before your time. Also, by now, you have picked up a few areas that you find familiar from a technical and product perspective, and you have a few ideas on how to reduce investigation time. And more importantly, you know how to place your solutions in such an obvious way that anyone can figure out what to do in your absence. Ways in which you might consider doing this is by adding guiding documentation next to the most common error messages. Create operational runbooks for your repetitive chores. Build monitoring tools that surface the answers to the most common questions that you get on support. And lastly, Figure out ways of reducing blind spots with 1% improvements, whether that means writing interactive playbooks or intentional tests. As you have been exposed to most parts of the system at this point, you have the space to figure out ways in which you can recover from scenarios that haven't happened yet. Or even more interestingly, figure out an escape plan. Can you completely remove yourself and others from this scenario? Build safe solutions that can automatically recover from failures. Self-imposed standards of your new system components, not to reduce their autonomy, but just to give them a better lifeline in the system conglomerate that they will live in. Facilitate workshops in which relevant teams can find the answers to their technical and non-technical questions without your intervention. And lastly, find ways of making onboarding easy, in such a manner that you can reduce the period of adjustment for a new joiner, and they can feel confident to build on top of your solutions as soon as possible. Practice number 2, over-communicate and over-collaborate. Don't let anyone doubt what is your intentions or purpose, whether that is sharing the progress of a goal or sharing the progress of a simple ticket. A visible developer in a visible team brings reassurance to the department and the business that you are heading in the direction it is expected of you. As an internal team, it may not be as natural to you to be as loud as product teams, but if the nature of your work is so unpredictable that you cannot follow a roadmap, it is imperative to share these goals, these highlights loudly. So in the incipient stages of your collaboration, you do let these problems come to you. You are available to answer support requests as they come, regardless of their urgency, with the set priority that they already have. You are available to help others unblock themselves, unblock the common delivery tools, such as deployment pipelines, misconfigurations in the system, or chasing critical bugs in production. Lastly, while it may not seem as reactive, it is safe to assume that the business will need to know the progress of your work. Just because your manager knows what you are doing, it doesn't mean that the rest of the organization knows. So use your channels of communication to share with the rest of the department how you are doing on a regular cadence. For us, at the end of every month, we will share our progress and our highlights in accordance to our business values, with a soft promise that we are going to focus on different things for a while, but with the natural caveat that things may be subject to change. By now, you can make a better distinction between urgent matters and postponable investigations, and you can use that knowledge to create processes for self-remediation. You take part in cross-team conversations to ensure that practices that led to a problem are also being remediated in a transparent way. You promote a culture of risk assessment and ensure that rollback plans are in place in case a release goes bad. And finally, you can classify the type of incoming requests that are coming your way into high-level themes, and therefore can expose them as problematic areas of your application. When it comes to taking your collaboration to an entire level, I found that looking at the engineering conglomerate from a social, technical, web perspective really helps emphasize the interrelatedness of subsystems with the organization that they are in, and the connection of the organization within the environment that it operates in. It really brings light to the fact that in order to improve one part of the system, you really need input from all of the other components. Ways in which you might discover that is by recognizing that the velocity of your delivery without breaking changes is a symptom of effective observability. You anticipate that the lessons learned from another team are very useful and valuable to share with the rest of the department. And lastly, while some of these some of these decisions, made even at this point, may not be as transparently communicated as you consider. So it is essential to broadcast them very loudly so that to avoid having some of these standards fill in through the cracks. So for particular events when an engineer decides to build a solution and they are not aware of the standards that we have in place, it may be that time used to implement that solution may be considered wasted. So for those unfortunate events, having a very public record of the decisions that we are making, raised consistently and published consistently, would avoid a doubt in anyone's mind of the standards that we have in place, or at least give them a chance to have informed decisions of asking questions of whether we should have them or not in place. Practice number 3, conduct your orchestra. As you grow into your role of overseeing, you become more aware of your privilege to conduct your orchestra in a better harmony. Common concerns and patterns are becoming more obvious, and you are there to enable those channels of communication. You intervene only when a problem is escalated, and you work with the observability you have in place and follow the tests and the documentation that you have in place. But as you grow more comfortably on your podium, you seek to validate whether your orchestra can make safe changes in the system without your immediate intervention. You make it more visible when breaking changes enter the system, and you share with others how they can implement the same preventative measures. Ultimately, the more each service can be more self-adjustable, the better. So you validate whether protocols can self-correct, you try to make best practices visible, and you assess whether preventable measures are taken without your intervention. After several months of answering similar product questions, you inevitably are in a position where you can recognize problematic areas of your service. And you are there to consolidate them in a way that they can be shared to your product management as opportunities for better user experience, deprecation of failed functionality, or just new revenue streams. Lastly, you can recognize different gaps in your knowledge across your department, and you are empowered to report them in a blameless way in different environments for the benefit of the entire organization. So you consolidate them as recurring problems, you identify knowledge gaps, and you share those opportunities with the wider organization. The practices that you take on board might bring you anecdotal benefits, might even bring you the glory of some newly set standards within your teams. However, these 5 minutes of fame are only as good as the next shiny initiative someone is advocating for. The only way to really confirm whether they were helpful to the business or not is to align them back to the team of the objectives you have initially set. Just like in every anxiety-inducing situation, you are reminded to focus on your breathing. When dealing with the chaotic nature of support, realigning your thinking to the team objectives you have initially set as your axis will set you free. We are used to considering support load a very low-level, granular type of work where eventually it's filled with tiny annoyances generally. And they can distract us from the stuff that really matters, the roadmap. But I hope that this story brings you a different perspective on how supporting a mature product can be a very interesting, complicated art form in which common problems share similar behavioral patterns that haven't been questioned in a long time. If I can close up with this story with one piece of advice, it would be this. The ultimate goal when supporting a mature product isn't to have impenetrable monitoring, self-writing documentation, or telepathic communication. Although I must admit they all sound pretty nice. The priorities of the business will inevitably change. So it is the friends you make along the way and the lessons that you leave behind that should make all these efforts all worth it. The true aim isn't just to build a team around support, but to instill your quality standards across the future generations of engineers who will eventually take your baton. It is the manifesto you leave behind that will inspire new developers to rise against the status quo, seek innovation and scalable solutions for their quotidian tasks. As cliché as it may sound, you have the power to transform your legacy in an endless pursuit of operational excellence. Thank you.